That's why we're successful, because you took all the money away. If you took everything away, we'd still be there doing it. So even if I had to go and work a normal job, sweeping floors or something, I'd still be there running my free boot camps.
Today on Indigenous 100, it's Dave Letele, the head of BBM, the Brown Buttabean movement that's helping others deal with their weight, health and well-being, as well as supporting Māori and Pacifica communities through his food banks in Tāmaki Makaurau. From BBM, it's Dave Letele on Indigenous 100. Dave Letele, great to meet you.
Yeah, awesome to be here, man.
Thank you for being a part of Indigenous 100. BBM. What is BBM?
BBM is a group for our people that, helps to restore health and well-being. That's what we're about. It stands for Buttabean Motivation, and who would have thought that, when I started my career and really turning my life around through boxing as the Brown Buttabean, an overweight circus act of a boxer, that, it would have morphed into a group that's for the people, helping, thousands of our people.
How do you do that? What does that mean, helping people? What does that look like?
I've lost 100 kilos and I've kept it off. I think that's the important thing. I've kept most of it off, but not only the weight loss, I lost everything, I wanted to kill myself. I had businesses that I owned in Australia, lost them, came back here without my family, without my kids. And I was really just a broken man, and I was staying on my younger sister's single bed that I could have fed on, and I managed to turn my life around and to rebuild it. And along the way, I've started this group that's helping others. So it's not just about weight loss; it's about mental health, who you hang around with, and just a total lifestyle, a total healthy lifestyle. And that's what we do. And exercise is our vehicle, but it's so much more than that,
Yeah, because you were exercising this morning, right, before you came here. What were you doing?
So this morning was boxing, just boxing training in the museum. You can't beat it, you're training and you're watching the sunrise. It's just no other place in the world I'd rather be.
You do it every day?
So we do our boot camps, every day, Monday through Sunday with something going on. But, we have maybe about 2,000 people a week coming to BBM. It's an amazing ministry that, it's all over New Zealand and people from all over the world follow us. So it's good.
You called it a ministry. What does that mean? Why do you call it a ministry?
Well, it's not a gym. Everything we do is free. It's about serving our people. And leading by example. So it's a ministry because it's like what we've created is something like a marae or a village where people can belong to, and it's what's missing in our society these days. People come to something positive, they belong to something positive, and we're all there, we're all in it together, and we help each other. That's what it's about.
Wow. So how many people turn up on average a day for a workout, say in the morning?
So in the mornings is normally, today there was about 20 people. The night classes are the big ones, but we have, today we'll have 5 classes altogether. And the night ones out south, you'll have over 100 people. Out west, you might have 40 to 50 people. So the numbers add up,
Why do you do it? Because as you say, it's a free class. People can come along, be a part of it. Why do you do it, and what keeps you wanting to do it?
I do it purely to help our people, and I haven't forgotten what it was like to be 200 plus kilos, laying on a bed or in the gutter, looking up, thinking it's impossible, thinking there's no way I'm going to be able to get back to where I was, and we're our own worst critic. So I was there criticizing myself. How did I manage to screw my life up so badly? I haven't forgotten that. I haven't forgotten the struggle. So I want to help people. I want to help people get through the struggle and hopefully show them a shortcut so they don't have to walk and crawl through the tunnel of crap that I did. I want to show them another way. And I do it for that. I do it because there's no better feeling than being able to help someone turn their lives around.
How do you know you've been successful? Because there are a lot of people who need this help that you're talking about. And normally, people charge when they go to a gym, and which is why I was interested, you call it a ministry, right? But people go to a gym, they pay a subscription or they pay a fee, and it can add up, right? It's a lot of money to get a membership. So how do you know you've been successful? Because it's just not about numbers of people turning up to a class, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's heaps of measures that you can do. I'll just go on, there's a few for us. So if you're talking about from a government perspective, because they're all about data. So we get this, we're not funded. Yeah. So we have to start collecting data. So one measure of success is how many type 2 diabetics have you been able to turn around? So we've helped, hundreds and thousands of people that were type 2 diabetic that are no longer type 2 diabetic. One story is a lady was 15 years type 2 diabetic. She couldn't get the stomach staple because she'd had a heart operation. So she'd had a stent in her heart, so she couldn't get the stomach staple. She came to us and literally has changed her life. She's 15 years type 2, 12 weeks with us no longer. Wow. You got people that were trying to kill themselves, have attempted suicide, multiple times, have been in prison, have been drug addicts, have had their kids taken from them. All these types of people who have now turned their lives around, through us. So you've got all the numbers that measure success, but for me, success means someone that's totally had their lives turned around for the better. Someone that was in the gutter, like I was, looking up, thinking, there's no way this is me for the rest of my life. How many of us have felt that way, thinking, geez, surely I'm meant for more than this? Wow. And then helping them to realize that they are here for more than this, and then helping them to get there. And then once they're there, using our platform to then show others and inspire others what's possible. Because if they can come out of the gutter and be successful, anyone can.
And how successful has that been in terms of not just you directly working with people, but indirectly the people that you've worked with helping others? How does that work?
Well, we have 20 team leaders, that, when you think about that, we have 35 sessions a week. I can't run all of them, That's just in Auckland. So we have 20 team leaders that are all come from the journey, from starting there just to get healthy themselves under myself, and now they're all running my sessions, our BBM sessions. Then we're now developing a course that's NZQA approved to scale, because what we're doing needs to be everywhere. It's not the exercise that's the important part of what we do. The important part of what we do is the culture that we provide, where people feel safe to start. They feel safe, they don't feel judged, they start, and then they're consistent, they turn up,
How do you do that? Because that is ultimately a massive barrier for a lot of people to start changing their lifestyle in a healthier way. Particularly people who have there's a lot of shaming in our society of people who are bigger than us, who look different to us, that kind of thing. So how do you do that? How do you ensure that people come in a safe way to a safe culture that emboldens them, that strengthens them, that builds resilience, so that they're not feeling judged for giving it a go?
The hardest thing for anyone is to work up the courage to walk through our doors, and it's whether it's outdoors or a gym or whatever. It's hard for people to get that courage up. But what we do is we always say, once you're there, you'll understand. And we go live a lot, and people can see what we're doing. But once they're there, we welcome them. We high five, we give them a hug. Say welcome. We acknowledge our newcomers at the beginning, and say, it's all about doing the best you can. Even just getting there and watching is fine. And it's really, it's hard to describe unless you're there. Yeah. The culture is just second to none. Yeah. It's something that's so amazing, where you can have someone that might be 200 to 300 kilos training next to someone that's really fit, but both people are getting a good workout, and no one's left out. So the big person's not just left to the corner and left alone, but everyone feels and leaves that they've had an amazing workout and they feel happier, That's it, because you can lose weight and be miserable, but we want you to lose weight, and not just lose weight, but be healthy and do it and be happy.
And what about mental well-being, or the general well-being of the person? Because you're right, you can be sometimes the fittest person in the world. I mean, look at people like there are many examples of this. John Curran was an All Black and was still struggling at that particular time in his life. So how do you do that? How do you work with someone in a general well-being perspective, mental well-being, that kind of thing?
Everything we work on is mindset around nutrition, especially because eating is is the hardest part, and mindset around exercise. And so the way that we work on mindset is through exercise. So we break all the barriers down while you're exercising. Like for me at the start, I hated my life. I didn't have my children. I literally wanted to drive into a pole every day. But while I was exercising, I wasn't thinking about anything else. I wasn't thinking about how crap my life was. All I was thinking about was getting through the session. So what I did was, I realized that, and I said, geez, while I'm not exercising, I feel like crap. you know. So I exercised all the time because while I was exercising, I just didn't think about anything else. So what we're doing in our sessions is working on it and saying, look, while you're exercising, you're not worried about anything else. So your mind's relaxed because all you're thinking about is getting through the session. All the stresses of life are not present in that hour. And then we break it down it's a hard session. Of course it's hard, life is hard, so we train really, really hard. But we use the analogy as life is hard, we train this way so you can get through life. Apply all of the same mindset. Whatever you've used to get through this session is what you have to apply to your life. And the whole time we're seeding these messages. You don't even know it, but we're seeding it. You know, we're yelling it out, keep going, don't give up, keep getting up, you know. And after a while, you just start thinking different. You know, you start thinking about not just life, and not just exercise, but you start thinking about your life different. You start applying all those principles you've learned through getting up off the ground, you apply that to life, you know. And then when you have kids, if you want to, you know, break cycles, you have to have your children there watching and joining in. You know, our kids need to know that it's okay to fall over. There's no resilience in our children anymore because they're afraid to fail. And I always say, if I didn't fail, there'd be no BBM. So if I didn't fail in my life, there'd be no group called BBM helping thousands of our people to achieve greatness.
Wow. How important is your story and the ability to be able to help so many people, the likes of which you have helped over a number of years now? How important is that story that you talk about, your own life story, in the BBM movement?
Yeah, you know, it's a lot easier to take advice from someone who you know has been through it, you know. So my story is not just about weight loss. I come from gangs. My father was the president of the Mongol mob in jail most of my life. He was a bank robber and a drug grower. So I went through all of that, you know, and I came out and I never used it as an excuse. I did really well in sports. I did really well in business, only to lose everything, you know. And that's why when I talk to parents, I always let them know that be very careful what your children see, because I saw a lot. I never wanted to be that, but I saw it. So when times got tough for me, you know, I always remembered, what did my parents do when times got tough financially? You know, they robbed, they stole, they sold drugs, you know. This is what I saw. So when times got tough for me, I went back to what I saw as a kid. So I always say to parents, make sure your kids see the right things. You know, make sure you set the right example, you know, about working hard and keep getting up. Make sure they're only eating what you give them. They're only drinking what you give them. So make sure you give them good food and good drinks, you know, water, you know, and always make sure they see the right things, you know.
Because you're Samoan father, Māori mum,
Yep.
Right? Where you grew up in Auckland?
I grew up in Auckland, South Auckland, a little bit in Hamilton, and then when my father got locked up, I was in Australia.
Wow. And you were a successful sportsman, as you say. You were playing rugby league at a very high level.
Chased the dream for a while, you know. I played for North Sydney Bears. I was contracted with Manly. I played in France. I chased the dream for a long time, you know. So it was, I played at a pretty high level.
And then what happened? And I hope you don't mind me asking, but I think, as you say, I think it's important that your story is really effective in carrying the message of BBM forward. What happened as you were chasing that dream, when it all started to fall apart that you've talked about? What occurred for this life-changing event to cause so many problems for you in your life?
Yeah, well, you know, I had a couple of businesses that I owned, and I ended up, you know, making some bad decisions. And, you know, a lot of the times when we say, you know, we did a homeless event just a couple of weeks ago, and I was saying to our friends that were joining us, saying, you know, some of us are only a few bad decisions away from being where they are. Because when you think about it, how many bad decisions are you away from losing it all? And it's, for a lot of us, it's not many, you know. So I made some bad decisions and I lost it all, you know, and I came to a point where I was driven to still give my kids the material things that they were used to, but by just doing it by the wrong means, you know. And when I talk to parents, you know, we need to be very mindful and aware that our kids don't need the material things. Everyone wants material things, but they don't need the flashy things. What they need is you, and a healthy you that's there, present, not someone that's all out doing whatever they got to do to give the kids some nice shoes or some games.
When did you start to realise that though? Because it's tough when you're kind of in that cycle of going to work.
Hindsight's a wonderful thing.
Yeah. Well, when did you start to realise that potentially this is starting to get a bit too much and a bit too big to be able to handle?
Well, when I was lying on that single, it was my sister's daughter, my niece's single bed that I couldn't fit on. When I was lying on that bed, staring at the roof, thinking, Jesus, that's it, surely not. Surely I'm meant for more than this, and cursing myself. How did I manage to screw it up so badly, And that's when I realised, but you can't feel sorry for yourself. There was no one else to blame but me. So there was no one else that's going to get out of it but me. So people gave me opportunities, but you still got to take them, and you still got to make the most of it. So I got up and I went for a walk. That's how it all started.
Short walk?
Went to One Tree Hill. I borrowed my sister's car, $10 petrol, went to One Tree Hill, walked around it for 30 minutes. That's how everything started.
That's the first step.
That was my first step.
And what was your sister saying to you at the time? Because they're cognizant of the fact that you're a pretty talented fella, right? You were a very high-level sportsman. Was she, again, talking the same thing? But it's in your mindset, right? You've got to make the
I
choice.
had two younger sisters. One's passed away, and this was my youngest sister that I was living with. And, she wasn't saying much to me because I was the older brother, She was just being as supportive as she could, and she obviously let me use her car, and that car later became my car. So, she just, there was no judgments there. That's all I needed at that time. I was already feeling bad about myself, so I didn't need anyone judging me and she just, it was up to me. I had a good family, and I had opportunity to work. And I did, I worked my butt off to get up off the bed and to improve my life. And what drove me was having my kids, getting my kids back. So that's when I realized what was really important, and it was my family, So I just would use that urge and that want. I'd be crying every night, because I didn't have my children. I was miserable, but I used it as fuel to keep getting up, to keep driving forward, and to keep trying to better myself, to get myself to a point where I could one day have my children back. And I do now. It took me, I think, a couple of years. But it was hard. It was hard graft. And then I went into boxing. That came about through David Higgins, who I grew up with.
You went to school together.
Yeah, well, I was a poor brown guy. He was a poor white guy, and we became great friends. And he gave me that. It was really just an opportunity. Let's throw you in the ring and as a motivation to try and help you lose weight, and let's see how it goes. And but I had to play a character. I had to play like a wrestling heel. And it was funny because no one got it, So I came out and I said I was the toughest man in New Zealand. I was a big fat guy, and people went nuts, They say, who the hell is this fat B, that bugger telling us he's the toughest man in New Zealand? And, at this point, I was staying at a community home on a mattress on a floor. The reason I was on the mattress is because the bed broke. One day after training, I was tired, I flopped on the bed and the legs broke. And there I lay in a Grace Foundation community home with people just out of prison. I was staying with a rapist, That's where I was. And at that time, I was getting all this hate, death threats, because people just couldn't take it. The worst death threat I got was someone saying they'll send me rope to hang my family with. And this is the kind of stuff I was getting while I hated my life, while I was depressed, while I was hugely overweight, living at a community home. But again, I never used it as a reason to stop. I used it as fuel to keep going.
Well, and this really intrigues me, right? Because it would be understandable at that point to go, why would I do this? Not only have you got some doubts in your own mind, but there are a lot of people who also don't like you because of this persona, this character that you say you create. And I know you say that you just keep driving and keep going, right? But for many people, that's a hard thing to be able to do. Yeah. What was the innate thing that kept you kind of going, ignore, keep plowing ahead? Was it a simple step every day, or just how did you do that?
For me, we talk about it in BBM as having a really strong purpose, and we call it our why. It sounds airy-fairy, but it really does work if you put it to practice. For me, I had an overwhelming urge and a want, and it was just to be better and to have my kids back. That's all I thought about every single day. I wanted my kids back, and that was my why, And that's enough to keep pushing forward. It didn't always work. There were days where I just said, oh, stuff this, I'm over it. There were days where I just eat chocolate all day. No one's perfect, no one's perfect. But if your why is strong, it'll always get you back on the wagon. It'll always reset you and keep you moving forward, And that's what it's about. If it doesn't get you back on the wagon, then it's not your why. You need to rethink what it is. Yeah. And it's not a competition as to who has the best why, So it's whatever works for you, Whatever gets you up early to go to exercise, whatever gets you out after work to go for a walk, whatever stops you from driving through a drive-through most of the time, because no one's perfect, So that's what it was for me. Now it's my children, it's my wife, but it's my group, it's my people, being an example for them to show them what's possible. I met the other day a person that was just out of prison for life. And what he said to me was, he asked me, what's your why? I said, it's my children. He goes, everyone says that, bro. There must be something else. And I said, well, it's for people like you. My why is people like you that see us. Because what he said to me is, you're the try line. BBM's the try line. It's the light at the end of the tunnel to show people like us that are in prison that it's possible to change. It's possible to do better. And that when he said that to me, it just, it really made sense, and it is, it's my people that drives me.
Let's talk about the means justifying the ends, right? As you say, you created a persona and a character. I get the turn heel thing too, right? Some of the best heels in history, Hulk Hogan turned heel, The Rock turned heel, Bret the Hitman Hart, one of my favourite wrestlers, turned heel, right? Yeah, that's right. The Hart Foundation. But why, why Buttabean? I hated Buttabean. I think he fought Kimbo Slice one time. I couldn't wait for Kimbo Slice to smash. Well, why create that persona in that way? Was it just simply, were you cognizant, were you purposely trying to be the circus act, or why? Well,
the name Buttabean, brown Buttabean, came from there was a big fat white boxer called Buttabean, a really good boxer actually. Yeah. And I was a big fat brown guy. So that's where the name came from. That's how Dave gave me the name. The whole persona came about, I was in Germany. So Dave shouted me a ticket to Germany. It's one of the ways he motivated me to, when he paid for me to come back from Australia to here when I had turned around. He had to pay me business class because I couldn't fit economy. And when he offered me, do you want to come to Germany to watch Joe Parker fight? He said, you better train hard because I'm not paying business. So I started walking twice a day. But while I was over there, the head of German boxing never seen such a huge tattooed islander with tattoos all over and shaved head. So he dragged me through the crowd like a prize elephant to put me on a scale. And I weighed in at 178 kilos. So while everyone was shocked at how fat I was happy because I just understood how much weight I lost because every other scale kept saying error back home. So so I jumped on. I was so happy. And I went, yeah, what you see on YouTube, the American Zoo, I say, I'm the man, I'll take on anyone, and everyone was laughing in the weigh-in. And that's when Dave he goes, that's what you're going to do. You're going to play that character you just did then. You're going to be the most arrogant. You're going to do whatever you want. You're going to say whatever you want. You talk about yourself only in the third person. And I said, sweet, how much am I going to get paid? And it wasn't much, but it was a lot when you didn't have anything. So I wasn't on big money at all. It was only a few $1,000s. To fight, which isn't a much. And that's what I did. The first weigh-in at Joe Parker versus Brian Minto, I jumped on the scales. Scale said error. And I said, I'm the toughest man in New Zealand. And I challenged South Auckland because that's where Joe Parker fought. I said, there's no one tougher in New Zealand, let alone South Auckland. So, and people went ballistic. I know. And it was crazy. And I had to deal with that, And again, it was really hard. And I understood I didn't understand then, but looking back now and watching the stuff I did, I knew, I can get why people didn't like me. I was out there. Yeah.
And throughout that whole process, when you're developing this character, you would describe yourself as a completely willing participant.
Oh yeah. To me, it was that was how I could get money. It was a way of getting money in order for me to live and to one day get my children back. I had no idea that it would turn into this, but I just had to stay on the path. I just had to stay and it was the way I was earning my living. it was hard because I couldn't even go out because people hated me so much. They'd throw drinks at me, they'd try have fights with me, so I couldn't even go out. So it made my life harder. But at the same time, I knew I had to do it because, you know, it was the way I was earning money.
The interesting thing about it, though, is that because I suspect you also had a bit of athletic talent to be able to pull this off. I mean, I know you say, oh, I'm the toughest guy around, but you had a bit of physical prowess that could back that up in a ring, right? But did you ever get the sense at some point, or have a sense of fear? Not just about going out, but actually getting in the ring going, oh, I've actually got to do this now, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's always there. You're always nervous, you know. It's not, boxing it's not like a street fight, you know, where it's just spirit, you're in there, you know. Boxing before every match where I walk out, I'd always be dry wrenching in the back. Wow. I was so nervous. And then once you walk through the curtains, I had to play that character. So I couldn't show it. I couldn't show I was nervous walking out, but I was really nervous before every fight. And then when, you know, everyone leaves the ring, it's just you and the ref and your opponent. It is scary, you know, and it's not something I grew up doing. I didn't grow up boxing. I started at 30 something, you know, so.
You had to train, by the way, for this, right? You were training to box at the same time.
People would, you know, I was a larrikin, yeah, but I took boxing very seriously. And I think that's, a lot of the boxing purists hated me. But as I went forward and I kept showing improvement and I kept having good people around me in terms of, from the boxing and learning the craft, I started changing a lot of the boxing purists, you know, opinion on me. You know, and then they started to come round, and then they started to understand who I was, and they got it, you know. Then a lot of these boxing purists were starting to then help me, you know. So I trained really hard, I took it very seriously, and, you know, but I was not scared for my life, you know, because I'd come through situations in my background where, you know, I'd be in fights where you didn't know if you were going to make it out, you know, if you'd make it till tomorrow, you know. So that side of being on those sorts of things is a lot tougher than being in the ring, you know. But the ring is, you get a lot more nervous because it's all, you know, you're waiting to fight, you know, that, you know, the other guy, a lot of cameras, you know, the other person's training to fight you, and with me is, I know all the crap I've talked about, you know. So, you know, to having to back that up, and that's why my first loss, where I had in Invercargill against Kalini, who's a really nice guy, I talked it up. And at that point, I started believing my own hype. Wow. I was 10-0, and I started believing everything I was saying.
And you'd fought some pretty tough guys. I think you also fought, I think before that was Fino Maka?
Fino Maka.
He's a tough guy. Yeah.
You know, most of the guys I had we're all tough guys. But he was, this guy could hit, you know, and I talked it up, and it's always dangerous when you start believing your own hype and you let victory defeat you, you know, and that's what happened to me. But I lost, but it really gave me an opportunity to show people what happens when you lose. You know, you can't stay down. But believe that was really tough, and I had to go out of the stadium and the back entrance because all the crap I caused, and I said in the press conference that if I lose, I'll run down the main street of Invercargill naked. There's no way he's going to beat me. I'm that confident, you know. And after the match, everyone's saying, "Oh, you don't worry, Dave. You don't have to do it." I said, "No, I have to, because I said I would." So I did it. You know, I did a nudie run down Invercargill.
Luckily, it's not that long.
No, not that long.
Not long enough.
It's bloody cold though. And you know, it was just crazy. But it helped me get over it. But that night, man, the thoughts that were running through my head, people, they were worried about me, you know, they were worried about my, you know, if I was going to do anything silly to myself, because I was crying, and I felt like I let everyone down, and I was laying in the bath after going, oh, I should just drown myself. You know, we all, really? Yeah, I took it really tough, because I knew what was happening on social media in terms of the way that people, you know, the way I talk it up, so of course it's my fault, and the people's reaction to it. But I ended up doing a video and just being really raw about it and just saying, look, you know, the better man won. I'm going to come back. I'm going to show what's possible. And, you know, I had tears in my eyes, obviously distraught. And I got more support from that than I had from any win. Wow. It was the first time I really showed what I'm about. You know, it's not what you do when you're winning. It's what you do when you're down. You know, and can you get back up? And I did. You know, and that I got way more support from that, and the group grew so much and learnt so much just from that one loss.
Because it wasn't just social media, it wasn't just the public. There were some pretty heavy-hitting media professionals who were constantly crapping on you, if I could put it that way, and excuse the term, but they were bagging you for Africa. You know, front page of the Herald, back page of the Herald, Michelle Hewitson interviewed you and called you a circus act. And yet, I get the sense from you, though, that as distraught as you were, there was almost a sense of kind of inevitability that you were going to end up in this place, where you are now. Was that in the back of your mind at the time? Did you kind of have a semi-plan formulated at that stage, or were you still trying to work through it?
I didn't have a plan. I started the group, BBM, as just a Facebook group, as a place I could be myself, because I was on Joe Parker cards, I kept losing, and I was on TV, so I kept losing weight. So amongst all of the hate mail, I was starting to get messages, how are you doing this? How are you losing? What's the secret? Yeah. Everyone wants to know what the secret is, you know. And so when I tell them, people didn't believe me, you know, they were hoping that I'd say, take a pill, drink a drink, and, you know, do nothing, and you're gonna lose weight, you know. So I started a group, BBM Motivation, on Facebook, and that's really where I could share my journey, share my tips, share about what I was eating, just as like a blog. It's now, you know, over, I think, 14,500 members. Still private. I kept it private because I had a lot of haters back then, so I didn't want anyone infiltrating. So, you know, and I just kept it safe for everyone. And then from there, we started boot camps. You know, so all of this was happening as I was boxing. So then that's when I sort of said, okay, well, let's start doing boot camps, start helping people, but still I wasn't charging anyone. And the boot camp started with only 3 people. It was me helping my father-in-law's friend. And so it was him, me, and my wife. And now, you know, we're having, you know, up to 2,000 people a week, you know, from 3 people a week, you know, to that. And it's just an amazing movement. And it was really, as I was boxing and starting to get this following through health, that's when I started thinking, okay, I think I could do something with this, you know, but how? Because I'm not going to charge anyone. So how can I make a living and feed my family through doing this health and fitness while helping people and still keeping it free? And that's when I, you know, started looking at grant funding, started getting corporate, you know, well-being deals and stuff like that. So the whole business side, and also having a fitness app. So the fitness app is what I come about with. Some great people from Macroactive helped me, you know, to get into that, to use my following to turn it into an online platform that could make us money, which will then not only feed my family, but also fund our work we do in the community.
How did people like Macroapp and others take you when you go in with a pitch or whatever it might be, a proposal, knowing the personality you were? Yeah. I mean, what were they like when you walk into the room and they go, that's a guy, Bro Buttabean?
Macroactive approached me, John Franich, really just because they could see, you don't have to research much. You see the persona, but if you just dug a little deeper, just past the surface, you'll see what I'm about. And that's what they did. They could see the amount of people that I'm helping. And by then we were getting some good press around the stuff that we were doing. You know, there was some good media that could see that, and they were starting to, you know, publicize it for us. And so they approached me and said, look, you know, here's a good guy. He goes, look, you're taking a lot of punches to the head, which I was. I blocked with my head, you know. Have you ever thought about what you're going to do after boxing? This is John Franich. And I said, oh, not really. I don't really know what I'm going to do. This is sort of all I'm doing for money. And he said, have you thought about doing a fitness app? You know, there's a guy called Joseph Rakic who is his business partner who does very well. So it's the guy from West Auckland, and he's one of the top, I think the top 5 online trainers in the world. And I started that, and that's what's really paying our bills, you know. And so the idea for me is I focus on growing that platform so that we can continue doing and continue growing without relying on trying to get government funding, because we still don't get any government funding. And to be honest, I probably don't want it, because...
Why not?
Well, you start accepting government money, okay? You start accepting it, and then if you start relying on it to pay your wages, they got you. And then it just becomes a box ticker. You just got to tick all these boxes. So if I ever get government funding, I don't want them to have any say on what I do and the way because that's probably why we don't get government, because we don't fit the mold. The problem about the system is it's totally broken, especially for our people. So you've got to support groups that are already in the community at grassroots, at the flex roots, already working. You know, so someone asked me the other day, what would you say to the government? I say, well, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Go into a community, see what's already working, and support those groups. You know, the problem is that you've got the governing agencies and all the bureaucracy in the middle. Nothing, only a trickle gets down to the actual people at the bottom that need it, and we've seen that with the food bank that we're doing,
Oh, and I will come to the food banks. I guess the other thing though is this sounds like something the government should be supporting. I mean, the government supports a lot of programs that are similar, not the same, but similar. They might not support it as financially as in a viable sense that people may want to ensure ongoing sustainability. But these are things that governments look at. Is this a recalcitrant kind of streak to you, or is it just because this is your movement, you don't want it sullied, or you don't want it impacted by bureaucracy where potentially a lot of your mana, if I can put it in that way, would be lost simply because you'd have to do the box ticking? Is that what's motivating it?
I see too many groups, and there's too many big organisations now that are for our people, Māori and PI, that started with all the best intentions to help our people, But then once you then start relying on the money to pay your wages, and it's over, so, let's say it's over 50% of what you get in total in terms of your revenue. If you're starting to get over 50% of your revenue comes from the government, then you're just going to bow down and say, do whatever they say and do whatever because you've got wages, you've got people that rely on you to pay. So you're not going to upset anyone. You're not going to ruffle any feathers. You're not going to shake any trees. You know what I mean? And that's not me. So I do I'll say what I need to say for our people, and I'll find a way to make sure that we know we are sustainable. And we're very blessed that we are getting grant funding from people like Hugh Green Foundation, the Lion, Sky City and Lion Foundation, and One Foundation. These people are able, and Dewdrop we just got on too. So we're very blessed that with the connections that we've made and with the profile that I have, people can see it, and and they're helping us. And we're just actually starting to work with the county's Manukau DHB. Right. So look, what we do absolutely works. It's scalable. We've got the results, and now it's about research. So we're doing research now with Auckland Uni, and also Dewdrop are funding us for some research, because what we do works, and I know it does, but now we're going to back it up with clinical data, with the University of Auckland data, research to say, okay, well, here's the proof. So what other excuse do you have for not supporting us? Because we're ticking all the boxes. So it's just a matter of time, bro. Yeah.
So talk to me then about how you live, because you're not rich, but you're able to sustain the program, you're able to keep things ticking over, you're able to look after the people that work for you, right? And I don't think it's, for you anyway, it doesn't sound like it's about making money, really, and for all intents and purposes, it's about knowing the why and implementing the why, right? But you're able to keep things ticking over, you're able to look after people, you're able to look after your family, that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, look, I think I am rich because, I have my family, I have a roof over my head, I'm not worried about money, I'm not worried about bills. Not worried about where the next meal's coming from, which I used to be, But the way that we're able to sustain ourselves is through grant funding and through the app, So I have 3 full-time staff that, they all have families. They took a big gamble to leave their corporate jobs to come work for me, and they have family support. So there's me, there's the pressure for me to ensure that I keep the profile up and I keep the connections and I keep the money coming in, because we have 3 full-time staff that have families that they got to have their pay coming in every week.
How were you able to convince them?
Oh,
Was it a come on, take a
no,
pitch?
it was just there. I said, look, if you want it, it'd be a lot different to working in a normal corporate job, and it just gives them their mums. 2 of them are mothers, and one is not a mum, but she just wanted the flexibility. It's pretty cruisy to work for us, bro. You come in, you start at 9, they can go home, they can be there for their kids when they come home, they work a bit at night. We're not worried about the hours as long as the job's getting done. Yeah. And it's amazing. It doesn't feel like a job when you're doing it to help others, So they were already team leaders running boot camps, but now they're just in the office running me. But yeah. I was late today, so I'll have to give them a growling. They didn't warn me.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about the food banks. Why did you start the food bank? Why go into that line of mahi?
Oh, bro, it was the day before lockdown, the day before level 4, and I got a call from a social worker asking if I could help a lady from out south. I live in West now. And this is how crap the system is and the bureaucracies, this is what's wrong with it. So their funding didn't cover, because she's from West, the funding didn't cover a family from South, okay? They didn't, this organisation, their food bank was empty, so they couldn't even give them any food. So she rang me and asked if I can help. She's a friend of mine, a social worker. I said, no worries. By this time, you couldn't then bulk buy anymore. They put restrictions on how many items each you could buy. So she had 4 kids with no money and no food the day before level 4. So she came out, we bought her a whole heap of shopping. I said, make sure the social worker comes. So they got 2 lots of shopping. It was like $600, something like this. We took it out and the kids run out to the mum, we got food now. You know, right then I understood that anyone who was already struggling before COVID they're gonna be drowning now, you know? And so we had to do something to help these people. So we became an essential service. We used the profile that we have to be able to get some money, to get some food and some support, and we just started running a food bank. You know.
How many people were you helping throughout Alert Level 4 particularly?
We're helping hundreds of people a week, you know, and just again on the smell of an oily rag, you know. But our food parcels that we were giving them was enough for a week for a family. So you know, I saw, and this is what really annoys me. I saw yesterday a food parcel, you know, and it was from an Our People organisation, and they're giving fizzy drinks and ice cream and rubbish, you know. And this is the problem. We got as organisations like us, you've got to lead by example. You've got to give food parcels that with the basics, with staples, meat, veg, you know, eggs, bread, milk. You know, we don't give any rubbish, and that's what we do. You know, we're giving, you know. The hard thing with the food bank, bro, is that, number one, it's not funded, and it's the stories. It's a lot easier just to run boot camps. You know, it's the stories that you see that you can't help but be impacted by, and you're happy you can help, but then you're also extremely sad that you can't do more, and that this issue's even happening in New Zealand. You know, we had this homeless event, and when you see a young family with kids and they're turning up, and it's so sad. And then, you know, you just want to do more, but when you can't, that's what frustrates you. And it's sad that it's even happening here.
I saw you on a couple of clips that you put on social media that you were really frustrated with, well, again, bureaucracy, I think. Yeah. But, you know, throughout COVID, people trying to stop you from doing your food bank or events in town and stuff like that. And I mean, I completely understand what you're saying. You're trying to help people, and these bureaucrats basically trying to say, well, hang on, you don't have a permit to be here, or whatever it might be, those kind of things, right? So how do you progress your way through that, knowing that it is frustrating and knowing that you've still got to do stuff and you're not getting funded to do it either?
I think look, I've got a really good team around me. I've got my uncle. The funny thing with my uncle is he was the CEO of restaurant brands, I think, up until last year. So he was working for the enemy. He's seen the light now. He's working with it. And look, I joke around with that. Look, you know, takeaways are fine. Everything in moderation. You know, problem with our people is we don't have moderation. You know, so when we're bombarded by it, and when it's cheap, and we're just surrounded by it and targeted, in all the most profitable fast food joints are all in the most deprived areas. You know, there's a reason, you know, they target, but we fall for it, you know. So he's working for us now, so I've got inside knowledge. So I've got him he's from corporate life, he can deal with all the bureaucrat. Then I've got a really good group of girls that you know, basically they just apply for funding all day, every day. You know, that's their jobs, you know, and as well as trying to do everything else. And that's what keeps me on track, you know, and I've just got to be careful, because I can't go into these meetings and just, I understand that I'm the voice for our people, so I can't just be always negative, you know. I've got to be positive, you know, and at the same time, but hold these guys accountable as well, you know. Yeah.
But how do you keep doing it, knowing that you get to a point where you can only make a certain amount of headway, right? And make it sustainable too, because when you're not being funded for it and trying to run these programs that are really supporting communities, but you're not being given the resource to be able to do it, at some point you potentially have to make a decision where you turn the tap off. And if you don't do it, who else is going to do it, right? So how do you continue to maintain what you're doing, knowing that potentially you're putting yourself at risk of not being sustainable in the long term?
Yeah, well, I just have faith. I have faith in God that He'll provide. But I also work hard. So we, a lot of the time, especially with our Māori PI, we can, we're always saying God will provide. But faith without work is dead. So we make sure we work really hard, have strong faith as well. And look, I believe that it's only a matter of time. If we keep getting the results we are getting, surround myself with great people, and keep collecting all of the data, it's only a matter of time. I never think that we'll have to stop doing what we're doing. And here's the difference. When I turn up to a meeting, at a health meeting for a tender for a contract, I know I'm the only one there that if the money was taken away, I'll still be here. And that's the difference. That's why we're successful, because you took all the money away. If you took everything away, we'd still be there doing it. So even if I had to go and work a normal job, sweeping floors or something, I'd still be there running my free boot camps. We'd just be doing it in a park. We started in parks. And that's a big difference there. Anyone else that's in the room, they're all on 9 to 5s. They're there for the money. We need the money to help our people, but we're not relying on it because we've done it for free all this time. So that's a big difference with us compared to everyone else.
Is it a matter, though, at some point in time where things don't change? And I know you said, you've got faith that things will be provided, but there's a balance, right, about doing the boot camps and being able to provide at the same time. Because at some point you may have to make a decision. That's going to be tough, right? Yeah, well, about being able to do both at the same time. Sometimes you've got to put all your eggs in a basket.
Yeah. I think that's where the app comes in. So the app is very profitable. It makes good money, and that's where my focus is on driving sales of the app, on making sure that our social media drives sales to the app, and then also all of our corporate. We got good connections through LinkedIn. We're doing corporate wellness programs with GoBus. All those things bring money. Which allows us to continue to do all of the free work, and all of the corporate stuff and all of the apps only going to grow. And the online. I mean, a lot of businesses found that tough through COVID, but my online sales went up because everyone was at home. You know what I mean? And everything we've been doing was always body weight and always home workouts, what I've done from the very beginning. So I didn't have to transition. My workouts on the app were already home workouts. So it was a good time for us, and we just continue to grow.
So talk to me then about those home programs. What do you do, particularly those who you were 200 kgs at one time. And I don't want you to give your secret sauce away, but tell me some of the things that you do for people who are at home, because for some people at that weight and bigger, it's tough just to get up, just to stand up.
We have a From the Couch program, which we do at headquarters and also available online. It's basically just moving. So on the app, we really focus on mindset. So there's lots of videos around on how if you're feeling down, there'll be a video on finding your motivation, on your why, and all these types of things. The workouts are all just basic body weight workouts. There's no equipment needed because all of our equipment is already around here. But it's also good for really fit people. So it's just an amazing program that there's no equipment. You can train anywhere, anytime, and there's no excuse.
Okay, so let's talk about the longer term vision of stuff, right? Because I know you talked about not just being in Auckland, you're looking to nationalise, potentially internationalise. What does that look like?
The hard thing with that is, we were talking about it the other day, was looking at doing a franchise model, which is something my uncle was really good at, obviously. But
stealing the model from the enemy.
But the problem is that everything we do is free. So if we want someone to set up a franchise, they have to do it for free. So how are they going to make money? So that's where it has to come with. That's where it will have to be a funded program, where we get all these funded programs. We train up these trainers to think, to act, to run the sessions just like the way we like to run it. So it's all like a Les Mills. It's all uniform. You have all your different classes. They all run the same. And you just have your trainers doing it. So that's how we'll do that. So we're already in the process now of certifying our potential team leaders. So there's a whole another bunch of trainee team leaders that are right now going through certification. Once we get that right and we really get all that sorted in Auckland, then we can start scaling. But again, it comes down to funding, because any of our franchise models, I don't ever want anyone to pay. So that's a hurdle. So when people come to us tell headquarters and the personal trainers they might come see what we do. Our building costs $140,000 a year. And people can't get their heads around that I'm not charging one person to come in here. You know what I mean? So how are you doing this? You know, so yeah, that's the hard thing about trying to franchise.
Yeah.
Okay, so say this all works, right? And you've probably got a time frame of what, maybe 5-10 years, right? And you get this scaled up and it's working well and potentially you look at internationalisation of a franchise. What's next? What do you want to do past BBM? What is this it and will always be it, or there are other things that you want to do?
Now BBM's it for me, but what I want to do is be able to get out and spread the kaupapa, you know, and get out and speak. You know, yesterday I went to Tukuroa to visit a guy, 313 kilos. He's someone that's been following our group online. I've met him a few times, really a great guy. His wife does some boot camps down in Tukuroa, but he'd given up hope. You know, his wife rang me and said he's told the doctors not to resuscitate him. So I went down yesterday. I was away for the weekend. Went down Monday and I just spoke to him and gave him some hope and encouragement. You know, some words of encouragement, and that's what I want to do. You know, once we get all this up and running, where I'm just a figurehead. I don't have to be in there running boot camps. Everything's taken care of itself. It all runs, and then I can just go around to whichever town or whichever person needs me. You know, whatever country, and just spread our message, because our message needs to be everywhere.
It's probably a hard question, I'm not sure. How do you deal with that? There are people who rely on you, who rely on your program, who have done your program. And unfortunately, life being life, sometimes people who have done the program, it doesn't work out. Things happen for whatever reason. How do you deal with that?
Look, life it's tough. You know, and so him being in Tukuroa, I actually told him yesterday, you guys need to move to Auckland. Move to Auckland and be close to us. We've had people from Perth, move from Perth to be here for their health, to be closer to us. You know, so that's what I let them know.
People do that?
People from, there's a couple, Letele and Lonsi, who moved back from Perth last year to be here with us, you know, for their health, for their life. And, you know, for me, it's worth it. You know, if your life is worth it. So they moved here. I advised them, like yesterday, to move to Auckland. This is why we need to be everywhere, because it's a lot harder to do without us.
Wow.
You know, if you don't have our support, it's hard. You know, if you imagine you've got 200 and something kilos to lose, and you're by yourself, you know, it's really hard to do. So, you know, in terms of people falling off the wagon, I fall off the wagon all the time. You know, and all we say is, what we do is we do well. So this is the cycle that happens. You'll start, you'll do well. You might lose 10 kilos. Something in life happens, you fall off the wagon, you stay off the wagon, okay? You might put on 15 kilos while you're off. You feel bad, you start again. You do well, you feel good, you lose 10 kilos again, you know? Problem is, you put on an extra 5, you know? So you've lost 10 kilos again. Something in life happens again, you fall off again. Then you stay off, you put on 15 kilos, so you've added on another 10 kilos from when you started to, you know, you see what I'm saying? So all we say is, when you fall off, we all fall off. All you gotta do is jump straight back on. So if you fall off the wagon, don't let the wagon get too far before you jump straight back on. I didn't get to be 210 kilos by having a bad meal every now and then. You know, every meal was bad. I drank fizzy all the time and never exercised. So if you put it in perspective, every now and then I might fall off the wagon, have a bad meal. So what? You know, for us, it's not about having a six-pack. It's about being healthy and happy.
What are you? Well, you know, I've watched a lot of videos of guys like there's a guy in America who's a former SAS guy who, you know, lost about 100 kgs and goes running marathons and does this weird, David, I can't remember his surname, but you know, he's one of the fittest guys in the world, and his constant message to himself is when he's doing something is, you don't know me, I don't know what that means, by the way, but anyway, that's his kind of constant message to himself. What are you saying to yourself when you go through this stuff? What is your constant message to yourself in your own mind that keeps you going, that keeps you training, that keeps you working out, that keeps you fit, that keeps you healthy? What have you got like a one-line or a couple of liners that you're saying to yourself, that's your own message to yourself that keeps you?
Man, it's just really basic. I just say, don't give up. You know, keep going, bit by bit. I was down in Queenstown for a birthday, and I went and trained, just did this hill, and people thinking, why are you're on holiday? And I say, well, while I'm doing that, I'm actually not thinking about life. So, you know, there's no real message that I'm telling myself, because I'm trying not to think. You know, I just want my brain to relax and not think about all the stress of life and just think about getting to the top of the hill. So all I'm thinking about is keep going, don't give up. If I stop and have a rest, I'll just tell myself, keep going, come on, let's go. Yeah. Pretty much what I do, and I just look at the top. I just look at the top and try my best to get there as quick as I can.
Yeah. Have you got an example? Can you tell me about one example of someone who's worked with you for a long time, and there are many of these, I'm sure, but can you tell us of one particular example of someone whose life has completely turned around as a result of what you do, and that potentially has been a source of inspiration for your own self, for you? Have you got an example of someone like that?
There's so many, but one of the guys that works closely with me is a guy called Phil, who's over 140 kilos down. So 140 kilos lost. This guy was nearly dead when I met him. Wow. In and out of hospital. He had massive lymphedema in his legs, so he could hardly walk. Always had cellulitis, which he had to elevate. He was always in hospital. I might see him for a week, then I wouldn't see him for 2 because he's either in hospital or elevating his leg. He came to me because the doctor said, if you don't do something about your life, the next time I see you, you'll be in the morgue. He'd lost his brother, his mum, and his father early in his journey, And I said these 4 steps to him, and it's something that I share with everyone that works with me. I said, the first thing you've got to start, so you make a start. The next thing is you got to be consistent. Understand that no one's perfect. You're going to fall off, but when you fall off, you jump straight back on. Third thing is surrounding yourself with positive people that are all on that same path. That's what we've created in BBM. Positive people that only want the best for you. So anyone that's around you that's not positive, and the more successful you get, though, the more people you have trying to drag you down, cut them, And then the last thing is no excuses, Never let excuses get in your way. When you got someone like, there's another guy called Woodmu who was homeless 16 years. When you got someone like that that's totally turned his life around, couldn't walk when I met him, couldn't shower himself, couldn't go to the toilet by himself. When you got someone like that that's lost 100 kilos, totally turned his life around, what's your excuse? Don't tell me excuses, I don't want to hear them. Just do the best you can. That's all it is. You can walk to the letterbox. Even if you can't move, just focus on your eating,
Wow. What do your kids say to you now? Given where you were a few years ago, what are the kids?
Look, my kids are obviously, really, really happy and proud of what I'm doing. It's hard, man.
Why?
I've got to be careful, I think for anyone that's out there in the community and they're serving, their families miss out, and it's the same thing, with my father. My father now runs a thing called Grace Foundation, which is my sister started. My mum, my dad all work for that. So I never saw my parents growing up, obviously just for different reasons. And now, because of the work they're in, serving and helping others with, former prisoners. Now my kids, their grandkids don't get to see them. So I've got to be very careful because there's times when like today, for example, I leave, they're asleep. I'll get home, they're asleep. So I actually don't see them. So here I am doing this all for them, to help provide, to create a pathway and a legacy that they can take over, and then I'm never home. So it's a hard balancing act, whether it's crime or working 100 hours a week, you got to be careful as the reasons why you're doing it to make sure that you're there.
Is that cost, is that sacrifice worth it, given that's the whole point of the exercise?
Look, I've just got to be careful. So I'm very mindful of it.
And how do you do that?
Well, if I don't need to be at BBM, I won't be. So I'm lucky now I've got a good team. So I tell my team the same thing, because they all got families. So if you don't need to be at BBM running a session, don't be. Make sure you're at home. And the good thing about with our workers that it's real flexible. So look, if something happens, I can be, I don't have to ask anyone's permission to go. That's one benefit. But I've just got to, I am mindful, and as I think a lot of people could identify with that are out in the communities, to also, I would encourage them to be mindful of it, to make sure that you are spending those days and that time with your children and remembering that's why you're doing it.
One final question. This has been for me anyway. You talk to a lot of people and they talk about what drives them, and the quality that often comes out is, yes, there are sacrifices and costs, but they're very driven and intense people. I don't mean intense in a confronting way. I don't mean in an aggressive way or whatever it is. It's more intense about the kind of internal kind of mechanism that inspires and motivates and invigorates to keep going. And you're obviously someone who's very driven internally as well. So how do you ensure though that you balance that with the downtime stuff? Because is it hard to have downtime knowing that you've got so much going on up in here?
Yeah, it's hard. It's real hard, especially because nowadays with social media, we got a big presence on social media. So my phone's just constantly, you know,
blue screen fever and all that stuff.
Yeah,
Right?
and you know, it's not messages about just weight loss anymore. It's messages about I need food. You know, I need urgently help. You know, those are the types of messages we get, which is hard. So, I mean, the way I do it, I've got a team now that I just make sure that they can look after my social media. And I try my best to switch off, you know, so.
Walking helps?
Yeah, I mean, for me, exercise is you know, so people find that strange that exercise is my release, but it's exercise. I go to a gym called Body Talk in Newmarket where I started it when I was 170 kilos. That's my release. That's my therapy, you know, where I can go there with my mates and I'm not training anyone else. I'm just there to train myself and just be pushed and have a good time, you know, and I always leave feeling better. If I don't train, I'm worse, you know, so I've got to train and so my mental state. And just make sure that we go and do stuff as a family, you know. That's what I try and make sure we do more stuff as a family to keep that up.
Wow. I've really enjoyed talking to you. Thanks so much for coming in. You probably hate doing this kind of stuff because it takes you away from mission critical, right?
Oh, yeah.
You got to talk to old buggerlugs here with the leather jacket.
Oh, that's always, I always forget things like this, so it's good to look. For me, I'm always grateful to be able to get exposure because it's good for our group. Yeah, it's good for our people.
Thank you so much for coming to talk to us.
No worries.
I hope it helps in some way, shape or form in terms of what your mission critical is and what you're doing and that kind of thing. I wish you the best of luck, bro. I really hope that you continue on. Our communities need help, as you know. I mean, you're in you're direct. You're on the front line, right? And so I can only wish you the very best in what you're doing and all the best of luck, and that you keep going. And that you don't have to keep talking to people like me in the future. Nah,
it's good to talk to people like you, bro. And you know, I just hope, you know, I hope that someone out there gets something out of it. You know, that today we've helped someone. Yeah. And that's what it's about. And you know, there's no hope we will continue. We will continue.